Today we're going to talk about when things don't necessarily go according to plan. So did you have a bad run, and why does that happen? It's like most things in life. You might have a bad day at work, you might not be having a great day at home, or you're just not feeling good. There are so many different factors that come into why you perhaps didn't have a great run. And we're going to dive into those in this video now.
One of the reasons you may have had a bad run is the fact that you may actually have been dehydrated. The body is made up 70 to 75% of water. So most of us is water, and without optimal hydration levels, it affects the functioning of our body on a daily basis. That affects, or disrupts rather, if we are dehydrated, disrupts our metabolic processes. And the metabolic processes is actually how we transfer, or how we break down energy and transfer energy into the muscle cells. Now, if we're dehydrated and our cells aren't functioning properly, it affects that transfer through the membranes of the cells into the muscle of energy supply, which then means we're feeling a little bit flat throughout any of our training sessions. When we talk hydration, it's not necessarily about, on my run, I drank this much water, so I felt like I was hydrating enough. You can get to a training run or to a race in a dehydrated state already. You may not have hydrated well in the week or the days leading up to that event. So by the time you get to your training session in the morning, you probably in a bit of a dehydrated state already. So it is important to regularly make sure that we're keeping ourselves hydrated, and then obviously during the training session and after that training session still to be taking in enough fluid intake. One thing with fluid intake to keep in mind is if you're just drinking water and water alone, if you have a high sweat rate, that passes right through the system quite quickly, so your body doesn't necessarily absorb that fluid. And that's where we start to talk about, or you've heard electrolytes, maybe a pinch of salt in whatever you're drinking. That just allows the body then to actually absorb the fluid that you are taking in, instead of just passing it right through the system in terms of urine or sweat. Talking urine, that's probably a good indicator for you to be able to pick up on whether or not you are dehydrated, and how dehydrated you are is generally the color of your urine. If your urine is a very bright yellow color, that's a really big telltale sign that, hang on, I need to be taking in more fluids. Ideally, you want your urine to be as clear as possible. Gives you a good indication of good hydration practices.
Another factor that can impact on your enjoyment or execution of a run are environmental conditions. How hot is it? How cold is it? Is there ice? Is there mud? These are all factors that will play a role in how much you enjoy a run, or how much harder a run feels relative to what you're expecting. I think that's the best way of describing it. One of the things that we know is that extremes of temperature, both hot and cold, are two of the things that the body really struggles to deal with. Heat is particularly hard because you can't really dress too far down for heat, but essentially what happens is that your body struggles to shift heat, and particularly in hot and humid environments. So if you're in a hot environment, your body's fairly good at channeling the heat, because it just shunts a lot of blood out to the skin, and then through the skin it gives off a lot of heat. But what that does in turn is it reduces blood volume that's available to go around the muscles, and so our heart rate goes up, and that in turn can also impact our perceived exertion of that particular run. Keeping the skin wet, keeping the skin cool, those are things that you can do to help to alleviate that stress. Of course, in hot, humid environments it becomes very difficult, because your bodies start shifting all that blood to the periphery to try and help you to cool down. But because it's so humid, the body struggles to lose that heat through convection and conduction. And ultimately, the payback from your body is that it forces you to slow down, because it has to downregulate, because it's got to start generating less heat. If we go to the opposite extreme, of course, if you do go out and it's cold and you haven't prepped properly, not wearing the right kit, and your body temperature starts to drop, then it becomes very difficult for you to stay focused on task, because what your body will do is it will start to pull resources into the center of the body, because it wants to keep the blood away from the skin so that we don't lose too much body heat. If you are exercising in extremes, it's really important that you make sure you've got the right gear. And then obviously, if you're going out on an extremely wet, muddy day and you are running outdoors, or snow and ice, those are all things that are going to impact dramatically on the degree of difficulty of what that run normally is. And we just have to take these things for what they are. Enjoy being out there. Realize that you're going to be much slower, and that's really the key, because what happens is most people try and maintain a similar level to what they are accustomed to, and that means that run is so much harder than it's supposed to be, and so much harder than you feel it should be. And so you've just got to take the expectation of what you're going to achieve out of that run out, and really take it easy, go much slower. And then you'll actually find yourself having a really cool, different experience and getting out of the run what you intended to.
One of the other reasons that you might not have had the ideal kind of run, or just didn't feel great on that run, is that you might have perhaps started that run feeling a little bit mentally fatigued, or just an overload of general kind of stress. And of course, all of that plays a role into how our physical and our emotional tie in together. And so if there is a little bit of family stress or work stress, or you're just not sleeping well, you're going to go into that run feeling a little bit mentally fatigued. Our body works as a homeostasis, whether physical and mental, and so we have to take all of that into account as well. Very often we go into our training runs, having a certain expectation, and so if you're putting so much pressure on what you expect to come out of that run all the time, sometimes things don't always go according to plan. And so I'd really recommend that we just don't constantly overthink these training sessions beforehand. Of course, it's good to have an idea and an expectation, but that constant overthinking when you've got a lot of things going on can sometimes deter or get your run off track. And the same thing goes for races as well. I mean, take a race like the Comrades Marathon as an example. It's the world's oldest and largest ultra marathon, and people train for that for up to about a year, and so it's that constant focus on one race for the entire time that when you get to race day, you're actually so mentally fatigued that might throw your whole race off. And so we really need to just find the right balance between focusing on what we need for our races, getting the physical out of it, and all that we need from a mental perspective, but without letting that drain us in terms of our training and our racing.
Another really critical factor in training is whether we've recovered well enough, and the key aspect there is sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep, the reality is that is going to have a knock-on effect into your runs. You have a decreased ability to concentrate, your heart rate goes up when you are sleep deprived, and you've got fewer resources to dedicate to tasks. So essentially, when you run and you really are sleep deprived, runs will feel much harder than they actually are. And sometimes in the early stages of that process, it'll just be really bad at the start, and then within 15 to 20 minutes of exercise, when your body starts to release a few more stress hormones and a couple of endorphins, you will get over that feeling and end up having a fairly good run. But if you continue to go through the process of not getting enough sleep, then you're going to push yourself into a state where your stress hormones have been too high for too long. Your body will then start to under-secrete on those, and your ability to focus on runs and your ability to almost get that feeling of euphoria will be dampened. You'll just feel tired and weak, listless and demotivated. So those are all symptoms of a system that's struggling to cope, very often from not getting enough hours or enough quality sleep.
A key factor as to perhaps why your run didn't go according to plan can have a lot to do with fueling. Did you give your body the fuel it needed before your run in order to allow it to do what you're asking it to do? And perhaps during your run, did you give your body enough fuel to sustain what you were doing in that run? So let's break that into the two. So pre your training run, did you give your body the fuel it needed? So let's say you're doing a higher intensity run, a hill session, you really need to ensure that you're giving the body enough carbohydrates or glucose in order to do what you're asking it to do. And perhaps a longer run, again, we require somewhere between 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour of easy sort of long running, and so we have to ensure that we give our body the fuel beforehand. And the reason for that is this. Think about it this way, is that when you're starting out, your body has a certain amount of energy, right? And if we don't give it energy beforehand, if we're not fueling it, it then depletes while we're exercising, and then we want to just keep topping that up if you're doing a long run, or at the end of the run top that back up, so we're not living in this low energy kind of availability state. Okay, and so when you're doing a longer run, it's really, really important that we continually keep topping that tank up to ensure that we're not necessarily getting depleted during that run.
One of the other factors that has an impact on how you're feeling and enjoying today's run is the amount of clothing that you need to wear. Obviously, through the season changes, that's where it has the most dramatic impact. If you are in the Northern Hemisphere and experiencing a really, really cold winter, the sheer volume of clothing that you put on is very restrictive to movement, and that unfortunately has a direct impact on how you are feeling and how you are perceiving today's session to be. So again, when you get into those periods and when it's really, really cold, I think one of the key aspects to focus on there is that you are still getting out there. Doing the exercise is way better than getting no exercise done, and we have to reframe our expectations of what we are trying to get out of that session. And so accept that your range of motion is going to be compromised, it is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and your rhythm is going to feel out. And if you just accept those things and reduce your stride length, take it easier, that will minimize the impact. I think for me, one of the bigger impacts is that when we then move into these seasonal changes and you're not quite sure what the weather's going to be like outside, it's very cold at the start, but it's actually not cold enough to dress up like you normally do. And then what happens is that you get the double whammy. Now you're uncomfortable, your body temperature starts to go up. Because the clothing you're wearing are designed to keep that body heat in, your body doesn't have any way of getting rid of that heat. So now you're in a situation where you are both uncomfortable and very hot. As we spoke about earlier in the video, heat is one of the hardest things for your body to deal with, and then it will literally force you to slow down. It actually psychologically makes you feel bad so that the level of intensity can drop down so that we generate less heat through our muscles. So my advice to you there is that in the changing seasons, when it can be quite difficult to head out the door initially, is to wear layers that are easy to peel off. And if you do that, you can hopefully modulate your temperature as the run progresses.
The profile of your route that you run will definitely play a massive role in how your run goes. Let's say you're running on a hilly route and you're just trying to push and keep the pace for that entire time. Of course, you're going to struggle during that run. At the end of your run, you want your average pace to be within the prescribed sort of range, not necessarily that instant pace as you're doing your run. So when you're running on a hilly route, take it easy. Take some walks up those hills and then get back down onto the down and you can pick up that pace again. We really, really don't want to be ensuring that we stick to the pace throughout the entire run and start getting tired and really feel absolutely knackered after that run. And that's definitely one of the reasons why perhaps your run didn't go according to plan.
And then finally, we talk about having a bad run or the run didn't go according to plan. It is okay to have an off day. We all have them. It happens to the best of us. Elite athletes have an off day in race days sometimes. It is important for us to know that we need to be able to recognize when today just isn't the day, and it's not a bad thing if you decide to write a session off. That is probably the biggest difference between elite athletes and amateur athletes, is knowing when to walk away from a training session. If you start a run and you're just not feeling it on the day, things aren't going right, your body's just not getting comfortable in that run, the chances are it is an off day. It's not a train smash for you to just say, you know what, it might be worth me just going back to bed. You're probably going to get better benefit by going back to sleep and getting a couple of extra hours of recovery and rest than you would by trying to slog through a training run where your heart rate then just goes up, you're not feeling right, you're not comfortable, and that just has a knock-on effect for the rest of your day and potentially later on with other training runs. Walk away if the session doesn't feel right for you. Missing one training session here and there is not going to break the bank. It's not going to affect your training as a whole.
If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and also have a look at our other videos that are on screen now.